Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Everett Brooks, and I am 38 years old. I own a small residential contracting company in Houston, and until last year, I would have told you that one of my best qualities was my judgment. I was careful with money, careful with business, careful with people. I did not rush into commitments, and I did not hand my trust to anyone who had not earned it. That was why what happened with Asha hurt the way it did. It was not only that she cheated. It was that she learned exactly how much faith I had placed in her, looked directly at it, and used it against me like a tool. I had been with Asha for a little over 3 years. She was 32, sharp in a way that made every room wake up around her, funny without trying, polished without seeming artificial, and ambitious in a way I respected because I understood it. She worked in corporate strategy for a logistics company downtown, and she moved through that world with ease. When we first got together, I admired how driven she was. I liked that she had goals, structure, and pride in what she did. I had built my life with my hands, job by job, client by client, and I respected anyone who took their work seriously. The thing that made me believe she was safe was not charm. It was steadiness. About 9 months into our relationship, I got hit with a nightmare stretch in business. 2 clients delayed payment, 1 supplier went under, and I had payroll coming up. I was under pressure I did not talk about much, because I have never been the kind of man who likes to sit around describing his stress. But Asha noticed. One night, she came over to my house with takeout, found me at the kitchen table buried in invoices, and sat beside me without making a production out of it. She told me I did not always have to carry everything alone. She said that if we were building something real, then hard seasons belonged to both of us, not just one of us. I still remember that night, because she took my hand and said she did not want a halfway relationship. She said she wanted partnership, the kind where 2 people protected each other's peace instead of becoming one more burden. Those were her words. Protected each other's peace. I believed her. I believed her enough that when my life stabilized and things got good again, I opened my home to her. About 18 months before everything fell apart, she moved in. We settled into a rhythm that felt grown, steady, and earned. She kept skincare products lined up on the bathroom counter. She liked expensive candles and documentaries she would pretend were boring 5 minutes before getting completely absorbed in them. She left notes in the kitchen sometimes. I thought I knew the shape of our future. 6 months before the end, something shifted. Not all at once. Not in a way that would make a dramatic story if you only described the first few incidents. It began with a name. Vincent. At first, he was just someone from work. A senior member of her team. Smart, connected, reliable under pressure. That was how she described him. She would mention him the same way people mention any colleague who pops up often during a busy season. Vincent helped salvage a presentation. Vincent had a good line in a meeting. Vincent understood how to handle a difficult director. None of that bothered me. Adults have coworkers. Adults bond with people they spend long hours around. I was not looking for something to be threatened by. What changed was the frequency, then the tone. His name stopped appearing inside normal work stories and started becoming its own weather system in our house. We would be eating dinner, and she would say that Vincent had the funniest reaction to something that happened in the office. We would be driving somewhere, and she would glance at her phone, smile to herself, then say Vincent had sent her something ridiculous. I would ask what it was, and she would either summarize it too vaguely to mean anything or say it was office humor that would take too long to explain. The details were always just specific enough to keep him present and just vague enough to keep me outside of it. Then her habits changed. Asha had never been secretive with her phone before. I am not one of those people who measures trust by access, and I never once demanded to go through her messages. But when someone changes behavior in a relationship, you notice. Her phone stopped being left face down on the counter. It stopped living casually in the living room while she cooked or showered. It was suddenly always with her, always angled slightly away, always gathered up in her hand the second the screen lit up. I saw Vincent's name more than once after 10 at night. I saw the corner of her mouth lift before she typed back. What unsettled me was not one text. It was the private little current running beneath her entire mood. She also started coming home later. Not every night. That would have been too obvious. It was once or twice a week at first, then more often. There was always a reason. A client issue. A strategy call with another time zone. a leadership deck that had to be fixed before morning. She worked in a demanding environment, so the explanations were all plausible on paper. What made them feel wrong was the pattern around them. On the nights she was supposedly drained from work, she came home energized. She would be tired with me on a Saturday afternoon, but on a Thursday night, after some emergency with Vincent, she would walk through the door, charged up and glowing, carrying the faint smell of perfume mixed with restaurant air or wine. One Friday made me stop pretending I was only imagining things. Months earlier, I had bought tickets for a concert by an artist she loved, not because there was a special occasion that required it, but because I knew she would be excited, and I liked doing things that made her feel seen. That was how our relationship had worked at its best. I paid attention. I remembered things. I built moments. The concert landed on a Friday, and I had arranged my entire day so I could get home early, shower, and take her out to dinner first. At 5 in the evening, while I was pulling into the driveway, she called and said she was sorry, but a major account had exploded and she and Vincent had to stay late to rebuild a proposal. I asked where she was, and she said she was in a car heading back from a client meeting. There was nothing in that answer that proved anything. What bothered me was not the traffic I could hear or the fact that she was in a car. It was the speed of her defensiveness when I asked a simple question. Before I even said anything accusatory, she snapped that I sounded suspicious. Then she softened, said she knew I was disappointed, and told me she would make it up to me. I ate the cost of the tickets and spent that evening alone. When she came home after midnight, she was apologetic in the polished, efficient way people are when they want credit for apologizing more than they want to repair damage. She kissed my cheek, said I was the best for understanding, and went to shower. I sat on the edge of the bed listening to the water run and felt like something had quietly cracked. The next moment that stuck with me happened at a friend's barbecue. We were standing near the patio while everybody else talked, and her phone buzzed. She looked down, laughed immediately, and the laugh was so open and full that people turned. One of our friends' wives asked what was so funny. Asha glanced at me for the briefest second before saying it was just a work thing, something nobody there would get. That part mattered, not because everyone must be included in every joke, but because of the little flicker of superiority in her voice. She said it like she and Vincent shared some elevated world the rest of us could not access. I remember standing there holding a paper plate and realizing I was being asked to smile at my own exclusion. I talked to her that night, calmly. That is important, because she later tried to act as though I had stormed at her with some wild accusation. I did not. I waited until we got home, until the dishes were in the sink and the house was quiet, and I told her I was uncomfortable. I said the constant texting, the late nights, and the strange intimacy in the way she talked about this man were starting to feel disrespectful to our relationship. I did not accuse her of sleeping with him. I did not demand anything. I said it felt like something was crossing a line, and I wanted us to talk honestly before resentment hardened into damage. She stood in the kitchen with one hand on the counter and gave me a look I can still see clearly. It was not guilt. It was annoyance mixed with pity, like I had failed an obvious test. She let out a slow breath and said I was being paranoid. Then she gave me the line that burned the whole thing into my memory. She said Vincent was just her work husband. She said it with a little shrug, like the phrase should have soothed me instead of insulting me. When I stared at her, she doubled down and said it was just a silly office label, a harmless way of describing the person you were closest to at work. I told her I hated that phrase. I told her I was not interested in hearing the woman I lived with describe another man as any kind of husband, even jokingly. I said I was her actual partner, the man paying the mortgage in the house we shared, the man building a life with her, the man who had spent years showing up for her. Her expression hardened. She said I was making something out of nothing because I was insecure. Then she went a step further and said that if I trusted her, this would not bother me so much. That was the moment the cheating stopped being the only injury. It became gaslighting. It became condescension. It became her standing in my kitchen, taking my discomfort, reducing it to weakness, and asking me to apologize for noticing what was right in front of me. I remember going very still, not because I stopped caring, but because I understood something important. If I kept arguing, I would lose no matter what. She had already assigned me the role of paranoid boyfriend. Any attempt to gather clarity through conversation would simply become more evidence for her version of me. I saw that in one instant. So I changed tactics. I softened my face, took a breath, and said maybe she was right that I had let things build up in my head. I said I needed to trust her more. The relief on her face was immediate and almost cheerful. That was another injury I did not forget. She was not relieved because we had repaired anything. She was relieved because I had returned to a position that made her comfortable. She kissed me that night and thanked me for understanding. She told me there was nothing to worry about. She fell asleep quickly. I lay there awake, staring into the dark, and thought about every promise she had made to me about partnership and protecting each other's peace. Around 2 in the morning, I accepted something I had resisted for weeks. I was not going to get the truth from her. I was going to have to go around her to get it. I did not make that choice lightly. I hated what it said about where we were. But I hated even more the idea of being manipulated into doubting my own judgment, while she enjoyed the safety of my patience. The next morning, after she left for work, I stepped out to my truck and called a private investigation firm I had found through a referral from an attorney I used for business contracts. I trusted that route more than online ratings or flashy websites. The woman who answered introduced herself as Denise Carter, and her voice was measured, calm, and professional. She did not sound excited by drama, which immediately made me trust her more. I told her I needed facts, not speculation. I said I was in a long-term relationship, that my partner appeared to be involved with a colleague, and that I wanted to know whether I was seeing real misconduct or reading ordinary work closeness the wrong way. Denise asked practical questions. Names, work schedule, vehicles, habits, likely days they stayed late, what proof I'd already seen, and what I hoped to do with the information. When she asked the last part, I told the truth. I said that if I was wrong, I would have to face that and repair the damage honestly. But if I was right, I wanted to leave the relationship with my dignity intact and my understanding clear. She told me that was a healthy answer, then explained what her team could and could not do. She spoke plainly about legal lines, public surveillance, documentation, and the difference between suspicion and proof. That conversation grounded the whole thing. It did not feel theatrical. It felt like the kind of grim adult task nobody wants to need. I paid the retainer from my personal account and sent over the information she requested. Asha's full name, a recent photo, her office building, her car, Vincent's name, and what I knew of his role. I also told Denise something that felt embarrassing to say out loud, which was that part of what had thrown me so badly was not just the possibility of sex. It was the intimacy, the private emotional lane they seemed to occupy together. Denise said affairs often revealed themselves there first, long before any hard evidence showed up. That sentence stayed with me. It made me feel less foolish and more observant. The waiting was the worst part. Once Asha believed I had accepted her explanation, her behavior changed again. Not in a careful way, in a freer way. She became less guarded because she thought the problem had been managed. Her phone still stayed close, but she no longer flinched if Vincent's name flashed while I was nearby. She started telling me long, animated stories about the two of them solving impossible problems at work, finishing each other's thoughts in meetings, understanding each other under pressure. I would listen and nod while something heavy twisted in my chest. The more secure she felt, the less effort she made to pretend there were normal boundaries between them. During those 2 weeks, I discovered how exhausting self-control can be. I had to act normal inside my own house. I had to ask how her day was without showing what it cost me to hear the answer. She would lean against the kitchen island, sipping sparkling water, and tell me how Vincent always knew exactly what she meant before she finished speaking. Or she would say he had called her the only person in the department he could rely on. She presented these moments like harmless compliments, but there was pride in them, and something else too. She wanted me to hear how special she was to him. She wanted me to accept it as ordinary. The first report came in on a Friday afternoon. Denise called before sending it and told me not to open it while driving or on a job site. I waited until I got home, went into my office, and shut the door. The preliminary report was not dramatic. That made it more convincing. It was a list of dates, times, locations, and observations made in public places. On one Tuesday, Asha and Vincent left the office separately within a 10-minute window, then met at a wine bar near River Oaks. They stayed for nearly 3 hours. The photos showed them seated closely in a booth, not across from each other. One shot caught his hand, resting low on the back of her chair. Another caught her reaching across the table and touching his wrist while she smiled at him in a way I had not seen directed at me in months. On Thursday, they met again after work, this time at a restaurant farther across town where couples, not co-workers, tended to disappear into corners. The photos were clearer. In one, he had his hand at her waist outside the entrance. In another, taken as they walked to the parking lot, she was looking up at him with an expression that made me set the report down and pace my office. There was one image of a kiss outside his car. Not something a creative liar could dismiss as a trick of perspective. A kiss. Long enough and obvious enough that no sane person would call it a misunderstanding. Denise had also included a note that Vincent was married. She had confirmed it through public records and ordinary background work. Married, living in a suburb west of the city, 2 children in elementary school. She kept that section factual and minimal, which I appreciated. She did not try to manipulate me into outrage. She did not have to. The information did that on its own. My girlfriend was not just betraying me. She was helping another man betray his wife and children. I sat in my office with the report open in front of me and felt the situation simplify. Painfully, but cleanly. The question was no longer what was happening. The question was what I would do with the truth. I called Denise that evening. I thanked her, then told her I needed the picture completed. I said Asha would try to minimize what I had seen if I confronted her now. She would say it was emotional confusion, a stupid lapse, office pressure, too much wine, anything that reduced a pattern to an accident. I asked Denise to continue. She did not rush to agree. She asked whether I was sure, reminded me that more surveillance meant more cost and more emotional damage if the evidence deepened. I told her I understood. What I wanted was not spectacle. I wanted enough proof that when the truth surfaced, nobody involved could bury it under language. Over the next 3 weeks, the pattern became undeniable. Every Tuesday or Thursday, some version of a work crisis appeared in my kitchen. Some emergency that only she and Vincent could handle. Some late strategy session. Some need for drinks after a difficult client call. Denise's team documented the rhythm of it. They were not together every time, which actually made the report feel more credible. But they were together often enough, and in ways intimate enough, that no honest person could pretend otherwise. Then the hotel appeared in the report. A mid-range place near the highway between downtown and the western suburbs. Not luxurious, not dirty, just forgettable. The kind of place chosen by people who are not trying to celebrate anything, only conceal it. Denise handled that part carefully. Her report showed them arriving separately once and together twice. It showed him paying. It showed them entering. It showed them leaving hours later. It showed the body language that came before and after, which by itself told the story. She did not send me anything lurid or invasive. She did not need to. The timestamps, the frequency, the pattern, the kisses, the hotel visits, the lies told to me on the same nights, all of it formed a record stronger than any shouted confession. The final report was devastating because it was methodical. No melodrama, no guesswork, just truth arranged in order. That report also confirmed something else important. Vincent was not just a peer she happened to flirt with. He had influence over projects that affected her visibility inside the company. Not her direct manager, but senior enough that the relationship crossed obvious professional boundaries. That mattered to me later because it explained some of the smugness I'd seen in her. She was not only intoxicated by romance. She was intoxicated by access, validation, status, and the thrill of being chosen in 2 arenas at once, personal and professional. She was gambling with my trust, his marriage, and her own career, all while acting like I was childish for noticing. Once I had the final report, I spent a full day doing nothing. I went to work. I walked through 2 renovation sites. I reviewed invoices. I answered client emails. I let myself be a person with a normal life instead of a man consumed by betrayal. That was important. I did not want my next decision to come from heat. I wanted it to come from clarity. By that night, I knew 2 things. First, Asha was leaving my house. Second, Vincent's wife deserved the truth. I wrestled with that second decision more than I like to admit. Not because she did not deserve to know, but because I understood what it would do. Once facts like these enter a home, they do not arrive quietly. In the end, I came back to a simple principle. If I were the spouse being betrayed, I would want somebody to tell me. Not with gossip, not with vengeance theatrics, with proof. Enough proof that I would not be forced to live inside somebody else's lies one day longer than necessary. So I selected a small set of photographs and summary pages from the report. I chose only what was necessary to establish the reality of the affair. No gratuitous humiliation. No details designed to wound for entertainment. Just a clear record of meetings, kisses, and hotel visits tied to dates. Then I typed a short note. I did not sign my name. I simply wrote that I believed she deserved to know what her husband had been doing during his supposed late nights at work, and that the enclosed material documented a pattern, not a single mistake. I mailed the envelope from a post office across town the next morning before work. My hands were steady the whole time, not because I felt triumphant, because by then the grief had changed shape. The rawest part had burned away, leaving something quieter and harder. I was no longer trying to save my relationship. I was managing the exit. Back at home, I started preparing for that too. I bought sturdy moving boxes, labeled them neatly, and began packing Asha's things over the next 2 evenings while she was still at work. I did not damage a single item. I did not throw anything away. I folded clothes, wrapped shoes, packed books, cosmetics, framed pictures, chargers, and office files with the care of someone closing a chapter, not throwing a tantrum. I put everything in the spare room and changed the code on my office door where I kept my business documents. I also spoke with the attorney who handles my contracts and asked what steps I needed to take regarding her move out. He gave me practical guidance and told me not to do anything dramatic about locks or access until she was actually out. That advice kept me anchored. This was not a movie. This was my real life, my real house, and a woman who had lived there for over a year. I intended to act with control, not recklessness. Still, by the time the envelope was in the mail and her boxes were stacked, I could feel the air in my house changing. It no longer felt like a shared place. It felt like a space waiting to breathe again. 2 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, my phone started vibrating while I was in the garage organizing tools. The first call came from Asha, then another, then another. I did not answer. A minute later, the text started. She asked where I was. Then she demanded that I call her immediately. Then came the message that told me the envelope had landed. She asked what I had done. I read that text 3 times and felt, for the first time in months, something close to peace. Not joy, not cruelty, peace. Because the truth was finally loose in the world, and no amount of tone management or eye rolling in my kitchen was going to put it back in a box. I stayed in the garage until I heard her car in the driveway that night. When I walked into the living room, she was already there. I had never seen her look like that. Her face was pale and blotchy, her mascara broken at the corners, her whole body vibrating with a mixture of panic and rage. She did not start with denial. She started with accusation. She demanded to know whether I had sent something to Vincent's wife. I told her to calm down and say exactly what she meant. She took 2 steps toward me and said Jennifer had received photographs, that Vincent was in chaos, that everything was blowing up, and that this had my fingerprints all over it. I asked her whether the photographs were real. She froze for half a second, and that half second told me more than anything she said afterward. Then she pivoted exactly the way I knew she would. She said it was not what it looked like. She said things had gotten emotionally messy. She said I had invaded her privacy and turned a complicated situation into a catastrophe. She said Vincent had been unhappy for a long time, that his marriage was basically over, that she and Vincent had a connection I would never understand because I only saw things in black and white. Listening to her in that moment was clarifying in a way I cannot fully explain. Even with the walls collapsing, she still reached first for narrative management. I told her to stop. I went to the spare room, brought back a folder, and laid several copies of the report on the coffee table. Not all of it. Enough. The dates, the restaurants, the hotel entries, the photographs of the parking lot kiss, and the repeated after-work meetings. She looked down at the pages, and I watched the fight drain out of her face in stages. First indignation, then calculation, then dread. She picked up one photograph with a trembling hand and said that the hotel had only happened a couple of times, as if that distinction mattered. Then she said she had been confused, lonely, under pressure, flattered by attention. Then she said I had pushed her away by being emotionally unavailable during busy stretches in my business. She was throwing every possible frame at the wall, hoping one would soften what she had done. I let her talk until she ran out of fresh language. Then I told her that what ended us was not just the affair. It was the contempt. It was the way she looked me in my face, called me insecure, and told me to trust her while she was already lying. It was the way she used that absurd phrase, work husband, as if I should feel small and modern and enlightened enough to accept another man occupying the emotional space that belonged inside our relationship. I told her she had not made one mistake. She had built a routine. She had created a second life and expected me to finance the stability that made it comfortable. She started crying then, but even that had an unstable quality to it. Some of the tears were real. Some were tactical. She asked whether I really wanted to ruin her life over something that was already ending. That sentence almost made me laugh, not because anything was funny, but because of the breathtaking dishonesty inside it. She wanted to stand in my living room, after months of lies, after enough documented hotel visits to build a calendar around, and recast herself as someone already on her way out of the affair when I interrupted her moral awakening. I told her the truth had ruined her life, not me. I simply refused to keep carrying her version of it. Then I told her the part that mattered most. Her belongings were packed in the spare room. I wanted her to make arrangements to stay somewhere else immediately. She stared at me as though I had slapped her. She said I could not just throw her out overnight. I told her I was not throwing her things on the lawn or calling the police to create a scene. I was telling her the relationship was over. The home we shared was no longer a place where she would continue living as my partner, and I expected her to cooperate with the move-out process quickly and like an adult. She sank onto the couch and covered her face. For a minute, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she said Vincent was blaming her for everything and would not answer her calls anymore, and my sympathy disappeared. Even then, buried under the wreckage of our relationship, part of her focus was still on him. She cried that Jennifer had confronted him, that he had left his house, that he was furious, that everything had spun out of control. I told her none of that had anything to do with my next steps. I asked whether she had somewhere to go for the night. She eventually called her parents. I went upstairs while she made the call because I did not want to hear her reshape herself into a victim for a second audience. Her father came the next morning. He looked tired and embarrassed more than angry. He did not ask me for details, and I did not volunteer them. Asha moved through the house with swollen eyes, collecting the few things I had left unpacked for convenience. There was no dramatic final speech, no apology worthy of the word. At one point, she stood in the hallway and said she had loved me in her own way. I told her that people who love you do not make you feel foolish for noticing betrayal. Then I took another box to the front door. By noon, her car was packed, her father's truck was loaded, and she was gone. The immediate aftermath was messier than the fantasy version people imagine when they hear stories like this. There was paperwork. There were logistics. There were items she forgot that I had to arrange to return through a third party. There were awkward messages from two mutual friends who sensed something had happened, but did not know what. I kept my side simple. I said the relationship ended because of repeated dishonesty and an affair, and that I had documentation if anyone needed clarity before choosing whether to believe the public version. I did not go on campaign. I did not need to. The facts were enough, and adults can usually hear the confidence of truth in a man who has stopped performing pain. Over the next month, I learned bits and pieces of the fallout without chasing them. Vincent's marriage did not survive the disclosure. That much became clear quickly. As for work, the company began reviewing the relationship once Jennifer's knowledge of it spilled beyond the household and into formal complaints. Since Vincent had professional authority connected to projects Asha worked on, the situation raised obvious problems. I do not know every detail, and I'm not going to pretend I had a front row seat. What I know is that he was separated from the company not long afterward. Asha resigned within weeks. Whether from pressure, shame, or the collapse of the fantasy, I cannot say for certain. Probably all three. I heard later that she moved back in with her parents outside Dallas while she looked for a new position. I also heard that the story she tried first did not hold. At first, she framed herself as someone trapped in a complicated emotional situation and unfairly exposed by a vindictive ex. That version lasted until people saw enough evidence to understand that this had not been one blurred evening or one misunderstood message. It had been sustained deception. That distinction matters. People can debate human weakness. Repeated, coordinated lying is harder to romanticize. For months after she left, I walked through my house one Saturday morning and realized it was mine again in a way it had not been for a long time. Not mine legally. It had always been mine legally. I mean emotionally. The rooms no longer felt occupied by tension. The kitchen did not hold the ghost of careful conversations. The living room did not feel like a waiting area for half-truths. I moved furniture. I repainted my bedroom. I got rid of the candle she liked and bought a leather chair for my office that I had talked myself out of for 2 years because it felt too indulgent. It turned out peace makes room for things you once thought were unnecessary. One evening not long after that, I found one of the old notes she had left me tucked in a drawer. It said she was proud of me and lucky to build life with me. Months earlier, that note would have wrecked me. That evening I looked at it, felt a brief ache, and then nothing stronger than distance. That was when I knew I had truly moved past the part of the story where betrayal defines the betrayed person. I was no longer the man in the kitchen being instructed to trust harder, while my reality was rewritten around me. I was just myself again. Everett, a man with a business, a home, a future, and a much sharper understanding of how contempt often hides beneath polished language. The most satisfying part, in the end, was not watching things fall apart for them. That was real, and I will not lie and pretend it gave me no sense of justice. It did. But justice and healing are not the same thing. The deeper satisfaction came later, quietly, when I realized I had stopped rehearsing the confrontation in my head. I had stopped wondering what else I should have said. I had stopped needing her to understand the scale of what she had done. Her understanding was no longer required for my peace. That is when a person truly loses their power over you. If there is one image that remains with me most clearly, it is not the report, the hotel, or the confrontation in my living room. It is the expression on her face the night she told me Vincent was just her work husband and that I needed to trust her more. At the time, that look got under my skin because it made me feel small and almost ashamed of my own instincts. Now I see it differently. I see a woman who mistook patience for weakness, stability for gullibility, and love for a shield she could hide behind while dishonoring the person giving it. She was wrong. I did not win because I outsmarted her in some dramatic game. I won because when I saw that truth would never be handed to me voluntarily, I respected myself enough to go and get it. I stayed calm. I stayed precise. I refused to let her define reality just because she said it confidently. That is what saved me. Not rage. Not revenge for its own sake. Clarity, timing, and the willingness to act once the facts were in my hands. The last thing she said to me before she walked out was that someday I would regret how cold I had been. I have had plenty of time to think about that. I did not regret being cold. Cold was what kept me from becoming chaotic. Cold was what kept me from screaming, begging, bargaining, or humiliating myself in front of someone who had already decided my trust was something to exploit. What I feel now is not cold at all. It is lighter than that. Cleaner. The relationship ended the day she chose to mock my concern and protect a lie instead of protecting us. Everything I did after that was simply the sound of a door closing all the way. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.